These recent labour changes are going to affect landlords massively. I'm a landlord myself, I own 29 properties. In this video, I'm going to give you live examples of how these recent changes will affect landlords like myself and how they will affect you. These labour reforms will change the social housing space massively. But is this the end of social housing? Let's take a deeper look. So, what is social housing? Why did it start? And how will the recent changes affect the social housing space? Let's get into it. Social housing's first big breakthrough came in the year 1919 with Christopher Addison's Housing and Town Planning Act. Soldiers returning from World War I needed safe, affordable and comfortable housing. The Addison Act made local councils responsible for assessing housing needs. After the devastation of World War II, the nation began a massive program to build council housing. In the 1950s, the council were building on average 147,000 council homes each year. Social housing went mainstream, and by the 1960s, a quarter of all of the UK's housing was council housing. The 1974 Housing Act introduced significant public funding for housing associations to build new homes. As time went on though, the proportion of social housing owned by the councils reduced. The 1988 Housing Act allowed councils to transfer ownership of their housing stock to housing associations. And many authorities did just that. The introduction of the right to buy in 1980 allowed council house tenants to buy their home, which further reduced the amount of social housing that was actually owned by the council. In 2010, the government shifted its focus to supporting first-time buyers with investment in shared ownership homes and schemes like Help to Buy. Although housing associations use their own funds to keep building some social rented homes, the reduction in funding since 2010 has meant that fewer social and affordable homes have been built. In 2010/2011, nearly 36,000 social rented homes were started. The next year, after funding cuts, that number reduced to just over 3,000. Today, it is widely accepted that England is in a housing crisis. Social housing can provide the answer, but there is nowhere near enough to meet the demand. Research shows that we need 90,000 new social rented homes every year, but the lack of funding means that only around 5,000 are getting built each year. Now, this brings us to one of the recent changes that the Labour Party are going to be putting into place. Their initiative is to build 1.5 million homes in the UK in 2025. But is this realistic? So building 1.5 brand new homes by 2025 is definitely a bold and ambitious goal. And its aim is to increase housing supply, which will definitely help ease the demand in both buying and rental markets. Currently, housing shortages are one of the primary reasons why rents and house prices have skyrocketed over recent years, making it difficult for both first-time buyers and renters to secure homes. This initiative will include a mix of private homes and social housing homes, which is crucial for addressing the issue of long-term affordable housing. Labour's focus is not just on volume, but it's also on affordability, meaning a significant portion of these homes will be available at more affordable rate. But there are lots of concerns on, is this goal actually achievable? Now, critics argue that logistical, financial and regulatory hurdles could slow down progress. However, if this plan is successful, it could relieve some serious pressure on the rental market by providing more options and potentially curbing the rising cost of rents. But how will this actually impact social housing? As for social housing, these reforms and the new homes target will be particularly important. One key focus of Labour's plan is to reverse the decades-long decline in social housing stock. But Labour intends to increase the availability of social housing stock as part of its broader housing strategy. I really think this is great because what it means is that more homes are being designated for low-income families. This will reduce the waiting list for council housing and provide more long-term rental solutions for those who can't afford private rent. This could significantly reduce pressure on the rental market and definitely provide more stability for vulnerable tenants as well. Now, for me, as a HMO property developer, I use a strategy where I lease my HMOs to social housing providers. Now, I do believe this strategy will continue to work going forward because I think that even if they do build 1.5 million homes, there still will be a demand for these kind of properties, these social housing properties. I just don't think they're going to be able to eliminate all of the social housing providers. I just can't see that happening. So as it stands right now in 2024, the government has lots of private contracts with different social housing providers. Now, these providers cover a range of different tenant types within social housing. So for example, this property right here, this property, I will be leasing it to a social housing provider. They're going to be housing refugee tenants. So this provider is one of the larger providers in the UK. I work with 4 different social housing providers. Now, they're going to actually pay me slightly less than market rent. So market rent for HMO rooms, that stands for House of Multiple Occupant rooms, in this area is actually £460 per month. So if I was to rent one of these HMO rooms to a working professional tenant, I'd be looking to get around £460 per month. And that's all bills included, so I'd have to cover all of the bills. However, because I'm leasing this property to a social housing provider, they're actually going to pay less than the market rate, which will make sense very shortly. So they're going to be paying £420 per room per month. So you might be thinking, why would a landlord like myself lease a property to a social housing provider if they're paying less than the market rent? Well, one of the main reasons is because most social housing providers will actually cover all of the bills on the property. So if I was to rent this to working professionals, I'd be liable for all of the bills, but the social housing provider cover all of the bills. So they'll cover council tax, gas, electric, water, Wi-Fi, you name it, they will cover it. So this property is a 5-bedroom HMO, and with this property, if I was to rent it to working professionals and I covered all of the bills would all come up to roughly £550 per month, which would all come out of my pocket as the landlord. Another reason why I rent some of my properties to social housing providers is because they deal with all of the management. So if I was to rent this property to working professionals, then I would have to pay a manager usually 10% of the total income per month. So that means in a month, I'll be paying on this 5-bed HMO roughly £230 per month. Now, another reason is because they give you a fixed amount per month. So every single month, I know exactly how much income I'm going to get. So it's very easy for me to work out how much profit I'll make per month off this one house. Now, this is great for me because it means I don't get any void periods when people are moving in and out of the rooms. So it's very stable and it's very passive once I've leased the property to social housing. Another reason is because the social housing provider will cover all of the maintenance costs and they'll deal with all the maintenance on the property. You can see the raw benefits of doing this, guys. Now, how it works is the government has very large contracts with over 1,000 different social housing providers across the UK. And they work with private landlords like myself, but they also own properties as well. It just depends on their strategy as a social housing provider. So I'm speaking from direct experience. I work with 4 different providers, and I can tell you that the reason why the government is funding this type of thing is because there is a shortage of housing. So I am hoping that the government do solve this problem by building all of these homes, 1.5 million homes. It could really solve a massive issue. And I think we would see less social housing properties just like the ones I've got. Now, for me, I just don't really care too much about, losing my contracts with the different providers, because to be honest with you, these properties are doing to a high spec. I can always rent them to working professionals. And yeah, I'll just pivot and change strategies as it comes. This kind of thing does not stress me out. I don't lose sleep over it. I just pivot strategy when I need to. So from my perspective, I hope they build these homes, but I do think it might be a bit of a stretch to do 1.5 million in 1 year, but let's see. So let's look at some of Labour's other proposed changes. So a big one, which has some landlords shaking in fear. This is no-fault evictions. Essentially, it's the end of Section 21. In simple terms, landlords will no longer be able to evict tenants without giving a valid reason. Currently, Section 21 allows landlords to evict tenants when their tenancy agreement ends, without needing any specific reason. Under Labour's reforms, all tenancies will run indefinitely. For landlords, this raises some concerns about the flexibility of getting their property back. Now, for me as a landlord, because a lot of my properties are leased to social housing providers, I don't actually get involved in the management of the tenants. So I don't have to serve eviction notices. all of the tenants that the social housing providers have, they deal with the management side of that. So I still get paid regardless if there's a tenant in there or there's no tenant in there. I've actually got over 150 tenants and I've never had to do an eviction. So out of the 29 properties, I'd say roughly around 16 are social housing and the rest are working professionals. So I've got a real, combination of different tenant types. So for me, the no-fault eviction, the end of section 21, for me, it's not a massive concern. So let's go a bit more in depth. So say, for example, when these new reform policies come into place, say if you needed to move back into the property, you as a landlord, you wanted to live back into the property, or you wanted to sell it and you wanted it empty when you sell, then you can still serve an eviction notice on the tenant. However, it must be after a 1-year period. You will also need to give a 4-month notice period for the tenant to find other suitable accommodation. This is an increase as it's currently 2 months as it stands right now. So another change is if a tenant is not paying rent, the legal threshold has changed if you wanted to take them to court. The tenant must now be in 3 months arrears for the judge to order an eviction. This isn't in place now, but this is what the Labour Party's reforms are going to look like. Okay, so they've announced all of this. So heads up, take notes. So this is a big change though, guys, because right now, as it stands, if a tenant is in arrears of 2 months, so if they haven't been paying their rent for like 2 months, then a landlord can actually serve an eviction notice on that tenant. So another change is rent increases. Under the new rules, landlords won't be able to lock in rent increases at the start of the tenancy agreement. Instead, they can only raise the rent once a year, and it must reflect the current market rent. So they can basically challenge it through a tribunal. So whilst this is not rent control, it's designed to prevent landlords from inflating rental prices to force tenants out. Because say, for example, they didn't want to go through the eviction process, a landlord didn't want to evict a tenant, they could right now just say, right, your rent's gone from £600 to £1,200. Okay, they could do this. And some landlords would do that to force a tenant out of a property. So this will no longer be the case. If this did happen, then the tenant could basically just request to challenge that through the tribunal process. So how does this affect myself? Well, on my working professional HMOs, how it works for me, guys, is that I basically make a tenancy agreement and I would always start with a decent rent that I'd be happy to receive for the next few years. So another change, bidding wars. Now, a bidding war is essentially when a property is available to rent and you have multiple applications on that property or HMO room, for example. Tenants will often offer more than the asking rent to try and secure the property. However, Labour's plans will put an end to this. Landlords or agents must publish a set asking rent, and they won't be able to accept offers that are above that amount. This could significantly impact higher demand areas where bidding wars are more common. Now guys, my property's in Nottingham. Although this has happened in the past, I've never had an intense bidding war on any of my properties, guys. It's just not happened. So Nottingham has a great demand for tenants, but I think because I usually put the asking rent at, I wouldn't say high, but I do normally start it for slightly higher, test the demand. So that's how I do it. So I don't really get these kind of bidding war problems. But all of my properties are in Nottingham in the East Midlands. So yeah. Another change. Changes to the anti-discrimination laws. Labour is also cracking down on discrimination within the rental market. Under the new rules, landlords will no longer be able to refuse tenants based on if they have children or are claiming benefits. This is a huge step, and I'm all for this, for making the rental market a much more fair place for all, which I fully agree with. I think this is a great step, guys, I honestly do. Now, there has been some concerns with landlords that basically they're saying that their insurance products won't allow them to rent properties to people on benefits or if they have families. So now they're actually going to change the law so insurance companies can't discriminate against tenants, which again, I think is very positive and a step in the right direction. Another change is the landlord database. Labour is proposing a national landlord database that will require all landlords to register onto this database, and you will actually have to list your property on this database. Local authorities will use the database to enforce policies and regulations. And this database might actually be made public as well, or some elements of it will be public. This will allow tenants to verify landlords. Now, one interesting thing is what they make public. Is it going to be company names or is it going to be individual landlords' names? I think they should have, you know, the company name, because some directors or owners of companies, they're not like me where they're out there on social media. Some people want to remain private as landlords and property owners. So I think they should probably do it in company names, but just make sure they have a point of contact for whoever the letting agent is, that kind of thing. Now, this database is designed to keep rogue landlords in check. And I also do actually think, guys, that this is a great idea. To be honest with you, all of these policy changes, they're not actually making me lose sleep at night. They're not getting me worried. All of this, I think, is actually a good idea. So although it means more work on our side, I do think this will actually lead to a fairer, more balanced environment for both buyers and renters. Now, again, it could mean additional costs for landlords because we have to pay for the listings, registering for the database, that kind of thing. Hopefully they make it free, but I don't think they will. I think they want to, you know, charge for as much stuff as they can. Fair enough. Charge us, just don't charge us like £500 to register. That would be a joke. If anyone needs a really good mortgage broker, I'd recommend Mortgage Style. Their link is in the description of this video. They're the rated #1 UK's best HMO broker. So check them out and tell them Luigi sent you. They'll definitely look after you. So the timeline and rollout of these reform changes. Now, these reforms won't happen overnight. The plan is for Labour to roll these out over time, but they will be enforced by summer 2025. Well, that is the plan as it stands right now, with the most significant reform changes such as the end of Section 21 coming into effect first. So what is the impact of all of these reform changes? Now, guys, keep in mind there are some more changes, but we've listed the main ones here. Let's wrap this up and summarize. So for landlords, choosing the right tenant has become more crucial than ever. Making sure we get it right in the initial stages, it is crucial right now, guys, based on all of these changes. With stricter eviction rules, landlords are going to have less flexibility in removing tenants, especially if they fall behind on rent or are causing issues within the property. If you do have to go through the courts, the process could take much longer, potentially leaving landlords out of pocket for months. Tenants are going to benefit from greater security and protection, with indefinite tenancies and the end of no-fault evictions. Tenants are going to feel more secure in their homes, knowing that they won't be evicted without a solid cause. Now, whenever reforms like this come into place, there's always speculation that landlords are going to hike up the rent prices just to cover themselves. Whilst Labour's plans don't directly cap rents, eliminating bidding wars could lead to a one-off spike in rental increase. So all rents might go up, especially in more high demand areas. Now, guys, keep in mind, this does not mean that property investing is dead. What it is you have to be ready to pivot strategy and stay on top of all of these new regulations. Now, guys, as business owners, entrepreneurs, landlords, we need to be savvy and we need to make sure that we're on top of our game. So right now, my key advice to everyone watching that's either a landlord or wanting to become one: get on top of your education. Read books on property, listen to podcasts, check out the rest of the videos on my YouTube channel. I'm here to help you guys and get results. If you want me as your mentor, that's another option you have. All you need to do is click on the link in the description of this video and click on Get Coached by Luigi. Remember, guys, like, comment, subscribe, and stay tuned for more videos.